We've been talking about the Four Noble Truths, and yesterday evening we talked about basically the first Noble Truth. So I'll just give a really brief summary, and then we'll get through the three others tonight. I will try and be brief about it, and maybe in other talks we will see some, in a deeper way, some other aspects of them. Anyway, as we all know, the first Noble Truth is the truth of suffering, dukkha. We have seen that this, word can be quite difficult to translate, and sometimes it's translated as, pain, suffering, whatever. Anyway, we've seen that basically we can define it as that gap between the way things are and the way we would like them to be. So all of that gap is basically dukkha. Anything from, being slightly uncomfortable watching TV, or being in a meditation retreat, or pains, illnesses, physical, traumas and psychological disasters and things like that. So all of that is seen as dukkha. To make a brief summary, we can say that the Buddha just, in the first sermon, he talked about three kinds of dukkha. First of all, we have the physical, I will call it suffering for ease of words, physical suffering, psychological suffering, and existential suffering. Now, about the physical suffering, we all know about that. From birth to death, we could say ordinary suffering. From the moment we are born until we die, we are subject to ordinary suffering. This would be like bodily pain that comes from illness, or the ordinary aches and pains of getting old, that sort of a thing. These are signs of physical suffering, but we all know that this level of suffering, like physical suffering, can also be a cause for psychological suffering to arise. Nobody likes to get ill. It's uncomfortable. Nobody likes to get old, not to be able to do the things we used to do. So that can also be a part of psychological suffering. But actually the Buddha gave us a list of three types of psychological suffering. We have the union with what is displeasing. I have to be in the company of not so nice people, for example. The contrary. That means being, separation from what is pleasing. Can be things, situations, people. As we get old, the people we love die, sooner or later, or we die. Anyway, we suffer, or they suffer. So being separated with what is dear to our heart, and that is basically suffering. And then we have not getting what one wants. Be it things or positions or being recognized. That is suffering as well. Psychological suffering. The third type is the five aggregates subject to clinging, that is existential suffering. Because we cling to those things that we falsely identify as ourselves. First of all, this rupa, this body, physical form, then vedana, like it, don't like it, don't know. And then, samnya, and etc. We've seen those things. We identify with those khandhas, they are called, and take them for what we are. I am this physical body, this physical khandha. And the problem is that these khandhas are subject to change all the time. So we base our identity on something which is changing all the time. So of course that is never satisfying, because it isn't really a stable foundation for it, and it's not anybody's fault. Very simply that things change. And if we use that as a base for our own identity, we will be constantly displeased with that. That is existential suffering. Okay? That's basically it. Then we touched upon the teaching of the Buddha that death in this life is not the end. Oh. Whoa. Who would have thought? Because basically there is this stream of consciousness, bhavanga citta it's called, which began a long time ago, such a long time ago that even the Buddha couldn't pinpoint the exact beginning of that. So it doesn't have a beginning actually. And this stream of consciousness takes different forms. Physical forms with all the other stuff, with all the other aggregates, So this physical form lasts for a while, a number of years, then starts malfunctioning. And in the end, it falls apart. No problem. We take another one. And we go on repeating this nonsense. Existence after existence after existence. With no end in sight. We go through the same process of birth, old age, death. That's the grim view of the Buddha. I'm telling you these things because they are very important to understand the second noble truth, the truth of craving. So we may believe these things, not believe these things, doesn't really matter, but it's important that we know about them so we will understand better the truth of craving, basically. Which is the second noble truth. There is a reason why we suffer so much. The Buddha identified the one reason in craving, or sometimes translated as desires, not really correct, because the Pali word is tanha, but the Sanskrit word is trishna, which is very similar to the English word thirst. We are thirsty. We need to drink all the time. But this thirst doesn't really go away. It gives you the idea. It's like, it's not really desire. It is this deep-seated need to swallow things, and make them become part of us. Be them things, ideas, concepts, experiences, whatever. So that's the idea. According to the Buddha, this is the root cause of all suffering. This unquenchable thirst that we are subject to as human beings. One existence after the other, because first of all, as you all know, Buddhism is the tradition of there are these long lists of things, Four Noble Truths, Noble Eightfold Path, 3 of these, 4 of that, 7 of those, it's easy to commit to memory things if you have a list of things. Basically, that was the reason, I guess. So, in the Buddha's teaching, we find 3 different types of craving. The first one is craving for sensual pleasures. Pleasures through the eye, the ear, the nose, the tongue, and the body. That means beautiful forms, delightful sounds, fragrant odors, delicious tastes, pleasant bodily sensations, entertaining and stimulating mental ideas to stimulate the mind. So that is the craving for sensual pleasures. So it means also intellectually, We like to read things, to swallow up new ideas, new concepts, new theories, new this and that, because it gives us pleasure, basically. We find sort of satisfaction in that, but of course it's never enough. There is always a new thing, it's the latest, the newest scientific discovery that will fix once and for all of our problems. Of course, it doesn't work like that, but that's the idea. Anyway, jokes aside, it gives us pleasure. So we crave not only for physical things, but also for intellectual things, for example. So that's the first kind of craving. Then we have, and this is really important, the second type of craving, which is the craving for continued existence. To go on existing. So this is the craving that first manifests through the clinging to the 5 aggregates. Body, mind, etc. Because of course, I'm identified with those as being me. So how cannot cling to those, since they are me? Of course I'm clinging to those, because being me, naturally it follows that I cling to those things, Of course it is not true that they are me, but we think they are me, so we cling to them. That's avidya, ignorance, mental confusion. But that's not the end of the story, because once these aggregates start to fall apart, we get old, we get ill, and then we die. Imagine that. There is this very ancient and powerful drive to go on existing. What do? We take a different form. We manifest in a different way. One existence after the other, after the other, after the other. Because underlying all of this, there is this driving, very powerful force, to go on existing. This body falls apart, not a problem, take a new one. And that's what drives, usually, the process of birth, old age, and death. One existence after the other. That's like the gasoline that makes this engine run, It's this deep-seated desire, craving for continued existence, It's really like a dynamic force, that drives this engine of existence, this cycle of rebirth, one after the other, after the other, after the other, after the other, after the other. The third type is a bit more complicated. It's a bit more difficult to understand as well, The technical term is Vipassana, which is usually translated as craving for non-existence. So we have craving for continued existence, manifests itself first of all craving to the 5 aggregates, and then a new rebirth and blah blah. But we also have this craving for non-existence. Now, one gets the idea that, this might be that, force that drives some people to commit suicide. But actually, in the sutta, we never find an example like that. It's not really that, And I quite agree with Bhikkhu Bodhi's idea about this. It's more like, imagine this: there is somebody who has a kind of repulsion to existence and doesn't want to go on continuing in this cycle of rebirth. Like, I've had enough, okay? Enough. Too stressful. So, there is this grasping or craving to the idea that this death will be the end of it all. So I can choose my preferred either philosophy or religion or whatever that tells me that once you turn the TV off, that's it. We go to some nice or horrible place, but that's it. Forever and ever. Done. Okay. Not so bad after all, compared to the idea of, my goodness, not again. That is nonsense. I can fully understand that point of view. It's highly, preferable to this idea that, oh my goodness, not again. Another time. No, please, no. Anything but that. Anything but that, So there is, yes, a grasping to non-existence, but from this point of view, I grasp to the idea that this time it will be the end. Done. Finished. No more. Okay? That's one possible way to look at it. So, to summarize, three types of craving. One for sensual pleasures. Two, craving for continued existence. First of all, to the khandhas, and then, once they fall apart, a new existence. That's what drives the process of birth, old age, death. Birth, old age, death. Birth, old age, death. So it's really a dynamic force, a creative force, It's go on. Something along those lines. And then the third type is this craving for non-existence. Seeing, like, I've had enough. Okay, this time, last time, it's over. Thank you very much. That's it. In a way, quite preferable to this horrifying prospect of never-ending nonsense. It's a nice place to be forever and ever. It wouldn't be so bad. Sitting in a shade someplace. I find that quite appealing, quite frankly. I've done my best, Naughty maybe sometimes, but not too bad, So let's get out of this nonsense, I find that quite appealing. Absolutely. Then we have the third noble truth, which is the good news. Cessation of dukkha is possible. The Buddha declared, I have realized the cessation of, which is nibbana. And you can do it too. If I have done it, you can do it. That's good news. Really good news. Really good news. It is actually possible to put an end to this cycle of dukkha, of suffering. I have done it. It's called nibbana. you can realize it as well. Now, of course, we have a small list, just two. There are two stages to the cessation of dukkha. They correspond to the two functions of craving. First of all, there's this, let's call it a psychological aspect to it. So when craving is done with, eliminated, we actually, right here, at this moment, we experience relief. Okay? Freedom from this dukkha of craving. No more grasping, no more clinging, no more desire for what I don't have. There comes a kind of peace, fulfillment, serenity, inner freedom from this compulsive drive of craving. So that's the psychological aspect. And by the way, we all know about this, but we are misguided, we are ignorant. In our everyday life, imagine this, we really have a strong desire for something. Let's call it craving, but anyway. And then, as sometimes happens, we get that thing. And for a moment, for an instant, there is a sort of a deep relief. It doesn't last, of course. It can be for something, for a relationship, for anything, The problem is that we think that we got satisfaction because we actually got that thing. We don't realize that we have this relief because for a moment desire is not there anymore. So it is not in the object itself. The reason is because for a moment that craving is not present. That's why we feel such relief for an instant. But we don't think because, craving is not there. No. Because I have that thing. No? That's a total misunderstanding. That's a basic, ancient misunderstanding. But we actually do experience that sort of relief very many times during the day. But we are always, all the time, misguided in a way. We don't see clearly, How come am I feeling such a relief? Of course, because I have this, I have that. At last. No? Not really. It's because at last, craving is not there for a moment. That's the idea. You may believe this or may not believe this. Doesn't matter. But try to keep this in mind in your daily life and have a look at it. Said, maybe there may be something to it. No? Imagine that, not just for a moment, but gone. Just gone. Just gone. Craving is not there anymore. No use for it. No need for it. So that means it's been seen through again and again and again and again. As something which is basically source of dukkha. Not only doesn't give satisfaction or lasting happiness or peace, whatever, but actually it's just the opposite. Like the factory of unsatisfaction. That's the idea. You don't have to believe it. Anyway. But, try and keep these things in mind. Maybe they might be of some use, sooner or later. So, maybe. Doesn't sound so silly. And the other is something which is beyond the psychological, meta-psychological. It's that when craving is done with or eliminated, then this round of birth and death comes to an end. There comes the liberation into the ultimate state of freedom, which is Nibbana. No more need to go on existing. Imagine, fantastic, it's not existing. Wow. No name, no form, no nothing. Floating about very lightly. Instead of having to have all these Facebook accounts with nicknames. Meditator. Not only that, Vipassana meditator. In this particular tradition, in this lineage, with this particular practice, rising, falling, rising, falling, rising, falling. Panasati, no. Isn't it a bit silly? In the end, a bit narrow-minded. So that's a nickname as well, But there could be worse, of course, much worse. That's Kusala at least, So, we still have a little bit of time. We come to the last noble truth, which is the way to freedom from dukkha. And that's the Noble Eightfold Path. I will be very, very brief tonight. We will see it another night. It's 1, right view. 2, right intention. 3, right speech. 4, right action. 5, right livelihood. That means the way you earn your bread and butter. 6, right effort. 7, right mindfulness. 8, right concentration. According to the Buddha, that's the way to free ourselves from dukkha by eliminating craving. And by the way, he said, I haven't invented this thing, I've just rediscovered this ancient path which has been walked already by all the Buddhas in the past. And I have rediscovered this and I'm teaching it to you. If you want to be free from dukkha by eliminating craving. It is possible. I have done it. It's called Nibbana. You can do it as well. How do you do it? You follow the Noble Eightfold Path. Not bad, huh? There is one last thing which is, I would say, important but often a bit overlooked. The Buddha speaks about 4 tasks, or for 4 things we have to do for each noble truth. Each noble truth is a thing which must be done. First noble truth is the truth of dukkha. The truth of dukkha has to be thoroughly understood. So we must understand deeply what dukkha is. Very often we consider things as nice which in the end are not so nice. So we don't see dukkha in that. Through the practice of insight meditation, you start seeing, even imagine what, more and more dukkha everywhere. There is an ancient saying in the Indian literature that for a sage, everything is dukkha, which is true, by the way. But they didn't commit suicide when they discovered this. That's interesting, But for a sage, everything is dukkha, as we have, described it, It's, of course, every conditioned phenomena, since it is subject to change, is basically dukkha. Not totally satisfying. It can't be. And it's not anybody's fault. It's just the way things are. That's the Dhamma, the universal law. All conditioned things are impermanent. That's the Dhamma. It's really quite simple if you see it from that point of view. It's not such a complicated philosophical, concept that you spend 2 years trying to, understand what Hegel was talking about. Nobody understood it, by the way. Anyway. That's quite incomprehensible. In fact, he was not a philosopher. He was in history, basically. Never understood why they gave him a teaching position at the university. And Schopenhauer was of the same, opinion as I am. So I'm in good company. But anyway, I digress. So, dukkha must be understood. First noble truth. Second noble truth, the origin of dukkha, which is craving, has to be eliminated, has to be abandoned. Craving is to be abandoned, let go of. Third noble truth, the truth of cessation of suffering, or nibbana, that must be realized. It's not enough to talk about it. It must be experienced. It must be an experience. Fourth, the Noble Eightfold Path is to be practiced. So, first noble truth, dukkha, we need to understand it. This is dukkha, this is not dukkha. Second noble truth, craving. Let it go. Abandon it. Third noble truth, the end of suffering, nibbana. It must be realized. Must be experienced. Fourth noble truth, Noble Eightfold Path. It must be practiced. So, I have to understand it. I have to let it go. I have to realize it. I have to practice. Not so complicated. That's, child's play. Now that we know, couple of days. Anyway, I would say that's all for tonight. By the way, I always forget. Do you have any questions about these things that I've just talked about? You're free to ask. I don't know whether I have the answers, but you can ask. Okay, otherwise we can... Yes, please.
What is the distinction between psychological suffering and existential suffering? The existential suffering also psychological?
Yeah, but we can make a distinction. Maybe like psychological suffering, in a way, could be, taken care of by other means, But existential suffering is really inbuilt in existence. For example, you could have a very long life, loving dear people around you, and not have much psychological suffering. But you will definitely have existential suffering. So existential suffering is not an optional. It's inbuilt in existence. Existential suffering. Psychological suffering is not compulsory. Very often it is, but no. Like also physical suffering. Some people have horrible lives from a physical point of view. They suffer so much. Other people, they don't. You know? But all beings are subject to existential suffering. No escape from that. Is that clear? Okay. Yes, please.
Perception.
Hmm?
When we give things name.
Yes, you recognize them.
Recognize, but we do it all the time.
Yes, we do.
Every moment,
Mm-hmm.
and how we
Mm-hmm.
can let it be if it's a part of craving.
Actually, you have a sort of a freedom of choice with that. The way you perceive things is dependent upon the degree of your mindfulness. Usually, you don't even think about it, right? This is that, whatever. Practice, mindfulness arises. Is it really so? You look closer. You know? Is it a bicycle really a bicycle? Well, no, it is a concept. It is very many things put together, and it's very useful to call it a bicycle. From a conventional point of view. From a conventional point of view, I am Piero, you are Annabelle. Very useful. Quite useful. But just from a conventional point of view. From a conventional point of view, there is this form. But if we just pay a little bit more attention, is this form really me? Perception. Different perception. It's, and it is very, very possible to have a different perception. Our perception is totally linked to, for example, our own needs. I perceive what I need. Okay, imagine you have a very horrible headache and you are traveling by car and you drive through small town. You will not see restaurants. You will see chemists' shops. Are there no restaurants there? Of course not. But will you see them? No. Because your most basic need at that time is to put an end to the suffering coming from your headache. Or if you are very hungry, you will see restaurants. Hey? Is it a bit clearer? Yeah? So it's not the fact...
I mean, when we look around, all colors, everything is perception.
Absolutely.
Well, I understand what you said, but in the big view, how we realize the difference between...
Allora, imagine this like it's a... We will see this in the, in Paticca Samuppada, dependent co-arising. It's a chain of links, okay? It's the name we give things. It's really down the line. Through the practice, you know this, I don't have to tell you. We can just stay at that level before we give it a name. Oh, imagine this. Pain in the knee. Okay? That is a concept. When you go for an interview, the teacher usually asks, okay, have you washed it? Yes, of course. tell me something about it. Oh, it's horrible. Well, that's a judgment. Please, tell me something about it. Well, it's not nice. Yes, of course. It's not nice, but what is it made up of? How does it work? Please tell me about that. So you are going backwards. Say, oh, okay. Well, actually, it's hard. Okay. And if you stay at the level of hardness, it's not that painful anymore. Very funny. It is what it is. Of course it is hard. But am I dying